All right. Well, thank you for joining me here tonight for week 2 of our Aesthetics and Theory of Communication. As far as updates for the class, I have graded your week 2 exploration, and so you will see feedback on that now. Be sure to take a look at the feedback. I always say even if you get a 100 score, because sometimes I'll point out some extra things that maybe weren't mentioned in your review, or clarify some points and so on. So take a look at that before you head into the next assignments, because it might offer some insight. I'm working on the week 1 projects. I've gotten, I think, probably 2/3 of those graded, and we'll finish up the rest tomorrow for certain. And I always like to have feedback on those before you get to the second part, which is coming up this weekend. What else? Let's see. Photoshop is due tomorrow night, and that's going to be working with color, so we'll be looking at that tonight. But otherwise, I think we are more or less on schedule. Did you have any questions? I know we already talked about the next week's assignment, but anything else I could clarify? Okay, absolutely. Okay, so if you recall from week 1, the definition we were working with for aesthetics was the interaction of different media elements and the perceptual responses that they create. One of those elements is color, and that's a very important and very powerful element of all kinds of media. And again, as we go through this, think of this in general terms. It's not just specifically to advertising or movie posters or anything that specific. This applies whether you're working with film or web design or graphic design or what have you. Color plays a very integral part. And you started seeing that with your exploration this week. And just to pull a few examples, and here's a quick quiz. What would you call the color relationship in this Gone with the Wind poster in terms of, the complementary, analogous, monochromatic, and so forth? Okay, it is pretty close to monochromatic. I would probably call this a little bit more analogous. They're this kind of a fine line because the colors are so similar, but you have some yellows going into orange and then more red, so those are some colors that are close to each other. So there's not a lot of really strong color contrast. Instead it's this really warm feeling, which would really ultimately be the same if it was monochromatic, but it just gets a little bit more diversity in the color. Look at the difference, though, if we change that to a complementary color palette. It really changes the mood a lot, doesn't it? It takes away some of that kind of the fire, the literal fire, but also kind of the fiery, passionate aspect. It gives it a little bit more of a coolness or a coldness in the feel. And there's sort of a side-by-side to let you take a look. Here's another one. And what would you call this color relationship? And these are all from the exploration as well, so ones that somebody picked. Yes, and that's complementary, and with the red and green. And I'll review some of the definitions of those color relationships. I know they're in the Linda lesson from this week, but just to make sure they're clear, red and green are complementary, meaning they are opposites on the color wheel. So they have a really strong contrast, and what that allows is for this character to really stand out and against that green background. If we were to change that, you can see now suddenly she's not as much the focal point anymore. she starts to blend into the background. And instead, maybe that yellow title becomes more prominent. So that use of color really influences what we saw in those last two examples, the mood, the emotion of the piece, as well as the focus and the emphasis of the design. And those are really the two roles that color plays, is influencing our emotion as well as influencing our perception, our attention. And in fact, that's the two topics for this week. Color psychology is about how color affects the mood, the emotion that we associate with an image or a particular symbol, whereas that ability to direct our attention and focus is an aspect of color theory, which is the more formal study of color relationships. Yeah, the red does give it the pop, and that's exactly the purpose. And that's why they chose to put the red against the green, knowing that that's the complement. That's going to always provide that pop. And okay. Have you ever worked with the color wheel in any kind of art class or any kind of classes in the past or on your own? Okay, so and I kind of suspected from your work that you might have a little bit of an art background, but so then you're pretty familiar with it and how it works. It's arranged in a spectrum, and each color is kind of gradually goes from one to the next in colors that are very similar to each other. But as you get to opposite sides, those that are directly opposite of one another are the complementary colors. They have the strongest possible contrast. And the reason being that they are actually competing for the color receptors in our eyes. It's all based on how our eyes work. Whereas those that are more similar, it's easier for our eyes to process those, whereas those that are more different are competing. It's causing this sort of conflict as to which one your eye is able to perceive, and that's why it has that kind of vibration, that contrast, that energy that it provides. I think if you have the textbook reading from this week, it goes into that a little bit more. It's not something you really need to know, but I find it interesting. In any case, the color wheel is arranged so that opposites, complements are opposite one another. Similar colors are adjacent to one another. And you could pretty much divide it in half according to what we call warm and cool colors, with warm colors being those that look like fire or warmth, or if you turn on your oven, the heating element turns red because we know that's hot. Cool colors are those that look like water or ice, or give us a feeling of coolness. And this is also important because those two kinds of color have different visual impressions. Warm colors tend to look more energetic. And think about the Gone with the Wind poster. When it was all those warm colors, you felt that action and the passion of the emotions. But when I changed that to a blue backdrop, it cooled it down a little bit. And I actually use the word cooled it down, both in the sense of temperature, but also the energy cooled down a little bit. Also, warm colors tend to look like they're popping towards you, whereas cool colors look like they're receding into the background. And we could see that with Amelie, right? Amelie's red blouse popped. You actually use the word pop. So it looked like it was more in the foreground, whereas the cool green background receded into the back and provided that backdrop. And this is going to play an important part. We'll see that as we go through some examples, that interaction between the warm color and its tendency to pop forward and the cool colors have a tendency to recede back, as well as the difference in the energy, is going to play an important part in the color relationships and how we use them. So the most basic color relationship is monochromatic, and this is, I like to use examples from classical art. This is a blue nude by Pablo Picasso, and it's all blue. There's no other color but blue in this painting. They are darker shades, and the darker varieties, actually, if you look at the color wheel, the darker row on the outside, that's the shades. The inner row, which is the lighter varieties, are called tints, T-I-N-T-S. And so by using darker shades and lighter tints, you can create a sense of depth and contour and shadows, but you're still just using blue, or at least he is in this painting. The same would apply if it was monochromatic warm colors, orange or red. So you can still get that sense of form and depth and visual interest while still using one color. You just don't have the richness that multiple colors would provide. And that's the main advantage. So monochromatic is the most basic. It is often described as being very clean and elegant, sometimes very calm, sometimes very energized, depending on whether it's a cool color or a warm color. So this is a little more calm and subdued, as was this example from Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. I believe this one was. Yes, number 6. And it looks like he's in the snow. And so the cool color gives it the literal cool feeling. But also, if you know the story, you know that he's facing some pretty grim obstacles, some really hard times in that. And so the cool color also captures that feeling, the coldness of the situation that he's finding himself in. And just as just kind of to show that this is very generalized, I've included a logo, and that's the Intel logo. And this is also monochromatic blue. Why, in this case, do you think that Intel would use blue as their brand color? Thinking about some of the kind of symbolic or cultural relevance that we put on the color blue. Okay, it's more tech-like. It might be described as more formal or more business-like as well. So, yeah, and it's not. It is a cool color, so it's more subdued and not like a vibrant, like sports type color where it's rah-rah, but more of just kind of down to business, because it's a business. They build business machines or components for business machines primarily. And here's our monochromatic warm example. So you see the difference in the energy. And go back, comparing to Harry Potter, both are very shadowy. So both have that sort of grim, serious feel. But one is more almost sort of hopeless, like things just are looking pretty dark. Whereas in Gladiator, it's still pretty dark, but it almost looks angry. Like there's that, because in this story, it's a story of revenge, right? He's coming for the people that are responsible for his family's death. Hope I'm not spoiling any movies by this. I should say spoiler alert for this particular lecture, because there's going to be a few, but they're all pretty old movies. I won't talk about Star Wars: The Force Awakens. So monochromatic is very basic. It's one color. All we have right here is are variations of yellow, essentially. Very bright yellow to very dark yellow, which, by the way, a lot of what we call brown is actually a dark shade of yellow. Sometimes it's darker orange or red, but it's always kind of darker, warm colors. So even when we get into the clouds, where we might describe that as brown, or the skin tone, it's a variety of yellow in formal color theory. But sometimes we do want more color than that. We want to have more variety and more visual interest. So then we can start to diversify. And that's where our more complex color relationships come into play. There are a lot of different color relationships. There's triadic and quadratic and split complementary and so forth. I'm not asking you to memorize all those, although you can, and I encourage you to if you want to explore this further. Really, the ones that I want you to remember are monochromatic, complementary, and analogous, and then achromatic as sort of a fourth. Because if you remember this relationship, just this basic principle that on the color wheel, those that are closer together are more subdued, more harmonious and calm, whereas those that are opposites are more contrasting and therefore more energetic and dynamic. You can really plan any color scheme just using that principle. And in fact, that's what you're going to do with your mood board this week, is pick out a color scheme for your personal brand based on these ideas. So if you did want to create a more subdued feel, but you still wanted to have some color richness, then you might use an analogous color palette. That means that all of them are from very close together on the color wheel. So they're immediately adjacent to each other. Because the farther you get away from, farther the colors get away from each other, the more different and more contrasting they are. So you start losing that calmness and that harmony. So taking colors, usually they say 3 colors that are immediately next to each other is analogous, but it can be more than that. It could be less than that. But as you see in the example, and this is one of Monet's paintings, it's pretty subdued. It feels very peaceful in this garden. Almost the same color palette as the Monet painting. Here's the Bug's Life. And you see we know that this is a Pixar film, so it's probably pretty fun and very lighthearted. But they're not trying to create an action film look for this poster. So they use this analogous color palette with green and blue and a bit of yellow, which is starting to get into the warm region, but it's kind of a hint of green in there as well. So it's not too bad as far as the contrast. You're not getting that exciting, dynamic Star Wars poster contrast. And then there's the BP logo with almost, again, similar color palette. There's no blue in this one, but you do have the green. So looking at this one, I might have grown up with Star Wars, yes. And fond of Harry Potter as well. But in any case, why would BP in particular pick this color scheme for their logo, do you think? Thinking about this significance of greens in particular. Okay, yeah, so green to you means nature, or something that's natural. And if you think about who BP is, it's British Petroleum, right? They're an oil company. What image do they want to put out to the public? They don't want to give this very cold and uncaring corporate polluter, impression. They want to give the impression of something of a company that cares about the environment and the world, and they're earth friendly, as you say. And so this color palette, green, which even our language associates that now with environmentally friendly, and also the very natural look of the logo. It looks like a flower. And so all of that ties into that idea that we are a natural company. So that's pure PR right there. That's all good marketing. Whether it's honest marketing might be another story, but it is certainly effective. A couple of analogous warm color palettes. So I was describing the analogous color palettes as mostly pretty calm and harmonious. Thinking back to the descriptions, though, if it's the warm colors are still going to add some energy, so you can still include a feeling of warm energy in there. As we'll see when I get into complementary color schemes, what they allow is a little bit more of a dynamic energy. So you can tell there's some action in both of these films. There's, with the warm red, orange, and yellow color palettes and the imagery itself, both have very different feels. The Pixar Indestructibles are Indestructibles. I just noticed this is the Spanish version, which I believe is the Incredibles in the English language version. Is really fun and has sort of cartoon action, as opposed to Apocalypse Now, which is very serious and dark, and so you do get some of the shadows in there, the imagery itself. And it's important because, remember, our definition of aesthetics is the interaction of these media elements. So color alone is not going to create a specific story. It's going to be the interaction of the color and the imagery. So even though these have almost identical colors, the story and the emotional impression is very different. This is more excitement and superhero action, whereas this is war. It's there's danger and risk and fear and that kind of passion, in the sense of fighting and trying to survive in this terrible environment. A lot of times I'll compare color to a musical score in a movie, because both of them are there in almost an unconscious way. You think about watching a horror film, and that shrill violin sound starts up, Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger is about to jump out and get their next victim. Color does the same way. It's there, it's very subtle, and it's influencing our impressions, but it's in a way that's even more unconscious than sound. It's and I'll show some examples coming up of how incredibly subtle, and I almost use the word insidious. What's a synonym for insidious that's not quite as evil? But the directors plan these things. They know exactly how this is going to influence their audience, and build that in. Nothing is ever left to chance. I got on a little bit of a tangent there. Sorry about that. But getting back on track with complementary colors. So introducing complementary colors, and this is using a Vincent van Gogh painting. And think about that principle. The cool colors tend to recede into the background. Warm colors tend to pop forward. he's used that in this painting to really thrust the cafe scene into the foreground, and allowing the cityscape to recede into the back. So that helps to focus our attention. It also gives the cafe scene a feeling of life and energy. It's got that warmth, that inviting feel. So it's pulling our eye to this location by putting it into the foreground and giving it that inviting feeling. And this is complementary blue and orange. By the way, blue and orange, or sometimes I'll say teal and orange, is going to be the most common complementary color scheme that you encounter, especially in movie posters. It is everywhere. If you look at any kind of action movie or summer blockbuster, teal and orange will be there, and we'll see that in several examples. A few other things, and this is off the topic of color, but also notice how he's directing your attention using lines in this case. All of these lines recede and point us right to this central focal point, right here, this little table. So that couple sitting at the table is our ultimate point of focus. And that is really good composition. Okay, so here's an example. Bourne Identity. It's an action thriller film. And what do you see? Teal and orange. Allows for that strong, contrasting, dynamic feel of the action scene. And leveraging the same idea as Firefox. They use the orange and blue for their logo, and that gives it more of a fun and upbeat feel. Comparing that to Intel, which is kind of very plain blue business-like logo design, this one has that look of fire in the Firefox. It's contrasted with that blue globe. Lets that fox really stand out. I meant to add a second one here, but I forgot, but that's okay. Blue and orange aren't the only complementary colors out there. There's many different combinations. We saw red and green earlier with Amelie, and then the color purple. Purple's complement, if we were to look at the color wheel, is yellow. So in choosing the color palette for a movie that's titled as color purple, obviously purple is going to play a part. It just makes sense. So that's kind of our base color. And then in deciding where to go from there, the designer selected that yellow, and it kind of has, we'd call this a split complementary color palette because it has orange as well. But the yellow directs our attention. It puts the focus on this block, and by providing that backdrop for the silhouette, allows the figure to become the most dominant element. That's our focal point now. If they had used any kind of cool colors for that background, the silhouette would not have been as strongly emphasized. And the fourth of the basic color relationships is achromatic. And achromatic is black and white. It's just the grayscale, no color. Achromatic actually literally translates to no color. These colors, well, actually, no, I shouldn't say that. These are not found on the color wheel. Black, white, and gray are not considered colors in formal color theory. They are hues not found on the color wheel. They tend to have low energy because they don't have the same warm, they don't have warm colors to add that energy, and they don't have the color contrast of warm versus cold, or warm versus cool colors. So they usually are a little more low energy, sometimes can be very depressed in their moods. Not always. They can be very elegant as well. So this is our classic art example. This is a illustration by M.C. Escher. And then looking at some more modern examples. And actually these are pretty good counter examples to one another. The Spectre poster is achromatic, but it's very serious. Even the look on his face is, this is serious business. So there's probably, knowing James Bond, it's going to be a lot of very dire situations and action taking place. The Furious 7, also known for, the series of movies is known for being action films. But this is a very different tone, and I can't think of the actor's name. But if you know the story of what took place with this film, that actor had just passed away, and he and Vin Diesel were close friends, and so this poster is almost a tribute to that person. And so rather than being this grim, serious poster like Spectre, it is a very emotional and subdued poster. Paul Walker, thank you. So there's really two counterpoints to each other, showing how you can make use of achromatic design. It can be very emotional and emotion-filled, or it can be very gritty and dark and serious. A lot of the Batman posters use this approach as well. Also, I'll point out there is some color here. There's sort of a sepia tone to their skin tones. So it's not truly colorless, but it's muted and desaturated to the point of being effectively colorless. So it creates the same kind of visual impression. And a trick you can do with achromatic designs is to throw in an accent color. And that's where everything is black and white, but then one thing is put in color. This can be done to draw attention. It can be very symbolic, depending on the colors and the context it's used in. This is from the movie Schindler's List, and the girl in the red coat is the only thing that's ever in color in the film. And so it has, there's been a lot of discussion about what that symbolizes and why that was done. And I could speculate on this. I actually have to admit I've never seen that movie, but some of the things I've heard are that the red coat is kind of a symbol of life continuing. There's this child who's the next generation. Red is a very vital color, and this color of strong emotion. And so that's one theory. Are there any questions so far, or any thoughts that you wanted to share? Okay. So with those 4 color relationships in mind, and also thinking about what colors symbolize in terms of emotions, we can use color to enhance our storytelling, or visual storytelling. So adding this into what we were doing last week. Remember, a visual story is the interaction of words and images to kind of evoke the sense of a story in your viewer. It doesn't have to tell every detail of the story, but it just gets our brains thinking about this story taking place. Color is sort of the spice added to that gives it a little extra power to influence our viewer. Taking a look at this ad design, why do you think they used the colors they did in this case? Okay, red is a more fun and sporty look. Think of it in the context of the slogan that they've used, though. Look at the words on there as well. And in particular, some of the keywords are the ones that are emphasized, right? The larger text, flame of desire. So there's two words right there, flame and desire. Red is a warm color. It has that feeling of heat and association with fire, but also it has association with passion and strong, strong emotions. Like Valentine's Day is all red. We get the red hearts. It's all about romance and desire and so forth. And so they've made that connection with their car in this case. The red car, the red backdrop, rekindle the flame of desire. You only need one drop of petrol. So this is very much an ad that's based on appearance. It's going for the attractive appearance of the car, the excitement that it would offer to drive, and connecting that with that strong emotion. Okay, have you ever watched the series Breaking Bad? Okay, do you plan on watching Breaking Bad? Because there's going to be some spoilers here. Okay, it's a pretty good show, and I'd recommend it if it's in line with what you enjoy watching. But what this infographic shows is, well, basically what they've done is gone through the entire series, all 5 seasons, and examined the colors associated with each character in each episode of the series, and connected that with the events that are taking place. Okay, Walking Dead's good too, and I can guarantee you the same ideas have been applied there. So what you see here is that, and in fact this is confirmed with this quote down here, Vince Gilligan, who's the creator of the series, says, I wanted to do the color timing for each of these episodes where you sit with a colorist and make sure that the color for each individual scene is just the way you want it. And when he's talking about color in the sense of color correction, digital color correction on the video footage, but also planning the colors that are there to begin with. What color shirt is this actor wearing? What color paint is on the walls and the furniture or the car they're driving? All of that is planned very precisely for a very specific effect. And I like to look at the character Jesse Pinkman. Jesse Pinkman is a young man. He's really volatile emotionally. He kind of blows up. He runs off at the mouth a lot. He's got foul language. He is a hothead. Doesn't take a lot to set him off. So, as we'd expect, there's a lot of those warm colors in there. It's that that fiery personality, especially at the beginning. And he goes through a lot of character development, so it's not surprising that changes a bit over time. But he starts off, there's all this red and yellow colors associated with him. But we see some interesting things happen. This is, if you think of this as a timeline, right here at the point that's numbered number 3 on those tiny little numbers, it says he's abducted by Tuco. And Tuco's this drug lord. He's a really bad guy. He's just dangerous and dangerously crazy. And so it goes from red, where we can imagine him being his loudmouth self, to complete black. There's no more color for a long while there. And so something bad has happened. And I can't recall exactly what was going on with him. He may have been locked in a dark room or in a trunk of a car or something along those lines. In any case, all the color that we associate with Jesse Pinkman is gone black. Eventually it gets better because there's a whole lot of yellow and red again, but then right here at 0.5 at the end of season 2, it goes from this long stretch of red to sort of a gray-green into black and white and gray. What happens right there is on 0.5, Jane dies. That's his girlfriend dies. So the color just goes out of his life. He goes into a depression. And that's underscored by this color. So these are the colors that he's wearing, that he's, the room he's in. It's no longer vibrant and lifelike. It's gray and depressed. And then he goes into rehab at this point where it goes to black and white and so forth. So really hitting a low point in his life, and the colors, just like a musical score, are going right along with that. And you could kind of examine that for all of these characters, except for Marie, who's just purple all the way through. But these are all very well planned. Have you seen The Matrix? Tell me you've seen The Matrix. Okay, good. Then I won't be spoiling anything here. What do you notice about this scene from The Matrix in terms of color? It's cool and dark. Any particular color that you see being an influence there? Green, right. Everything is green. Even Morpheus's skin tone has a green cast to it. It doesn't look natural. And that's done purposely because we know, having seen the movie, that they're not in the real world. They're in this computer simulated world of the Matrix. And that's not revealed. So the first time you saw the movie, unless it was spoiled for you, you didn't really know what was happening at first. And you figure it out as it goes along. Maybe, a third of the way through the movie, they reveal what's going on. But they still wanted you to feel like something wasn't quite right. And to do that, they applied these color filters, making everything green. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel like, it feels kind of unearthly and a little unhealthy, because green can, if somebody has a green pallor to them, they're probably sick. So that is done very deliberately to give us this sense, a very subtle sense of things being just not quite right, even when we haven't figured it out yet. Yeah, and the eyes are drawn to the glasses for a number of reasons. Actually, they're very dark, kind of pools there, so have a lot of visual weight. And there's use of these leading lines again, pulling us to his face. What happens with the color once they get out of the Matrix into the, quote, real world? And this is in Zion, right? The last city of the humans against the robots. Now we have warm colors again. We have natural skin tones. It feels alive. It feels healthy. And this was actually during a big celebration, so they're all sweaty as well and look very alive and very vital. So then there's also a third environment, and that's when they're outside. They're out of the Matrix, but they're not in the safety of their home. They're out in this post-apocalyptic world, and now everything is blue-gray. It's cold and uncaring and lifeless. And that's made to feel that way. We're made to feel that claustrophobia of them in this ship that they're flying around in. So this is one example, but also the Breaking Bad example is a look at how this is done. This is done in all film and all television. There are specifically people called colorists who are planning this out because they know that it plays a part in influencing how we as the audience respond to that scene. How about this? This is from Crimson Peak. How is color used here? What role does it play? And how would you describe the color relationship as far as, analogous and complementary and so forth? Okay, yeah, and it is something of a horror film. In terms of specific color relationships, what do you see? Oh, definitely recommend it. It was visually pretty impressive. I'm actually studying production design, so I have that perspective for it. But think about our color relationships, the complementary colors. You have that teal, which is in the house, the architecture. It's very, very cold, first of all, so it has that very foreboding feeling. But then her face is this pool of warm color right in the center, and that's where our focus goes, to her face. And it is very dark, and so it has that very creepy feeling, and it feels like we're seeing her face lit in this dark place. It really stands out. Remember that idea that cool warm colors pop out, whereas cool colors recede, so it really puts her into that dominant spot. And here's another example. Yeah, so that's, you said you're looking everywhere but her face, and that's something, kind of a mindset to just or get used to. Our way of looking is to really consider all the elements together. Sometimes you think about, like, if there's a title on there, then you think, oh, well, that isn't part of the image, it doesn't count. Well, it does count. It's part of the design. So you have to include the text, the images, and all the different elements of the image. And there's another case where complementary colors were used to really focus our attention, and this is from one of the Harry Potter films. And so we have Harry Potter in his red robes, very similar to what we saw with Amelie. So in order to keep our attention on Harry Potter, they don't want to have a lot of warm colors in the background, because then he would blend in. So they put this green pasture and forest behind him. So now he's going to stand out. He's going to be our focal point. Even though it's moving, this is a very dynamic scene, it'll keep our attention on him. Whereas the character of Draco Malfoy is in green robes, and so tends to blend in, even though he's closer to us. And use of color for emotionally symbolic purposes rather than directing attention. Blue is a cool color, subdued mood, more kind of depressed mood, and that's connected here with Jason Bateman, who's struggling with these tiny toddlers. Has a very distressed look on his face, so not having the best time, and the color is used to correspond to that. We even think about, when we say we're feeling blue, it means we're kind of depressed, we're sad. It's even in our language, but in this case, they've used that to illustrate that. And whereas Ryan Reynolds is with two young ladies, and that's associated with the warm orange color, more upbeat, more energetic. And here's once again that complementary blue and orange as well. All right, any questions? We're getting close to the end, but now I want to focus. So that was color for storytelling, and so you see how color is one of those elements, those media elements that influences how we respond to a story, and also the meaning we get from a story. The same ideas and the same color relationships apply for branding, and we've touched on this a bit already. Brand is not just the logo. A brand is all of the elements that are associated with a particular entity, whether it's a product or a business or what have you. So it's the brand, the logo design, the typeface, the colors, the personality that it puts forward, and even the style of the way of talking, the language that they use. But we become very attached to these elements. We can become very familiar with them. So these two brands are probably pretty familiar to you. And look what happens when we switch the colors out. It kind of is you kind of have to take a double take, because the color is so integral, especially with Starbucks being as popular as it is, that when you change an aspect of that, it's almost like changing a feature on somebody's face. And suddenly you're not sure who you're seeing anymore. Some similar ones here. UPS actually uses the brown and gold of their brand colors in some of their language. When they talk about their brand, they refer to themselves as the brown and gold. Same with sports teams as well. And if you change that, suddenly it's not as recognizable. So consistency with your colors and your brand is vital for building a brand identity. And that's why when we do our mood boards, we're going to pick those brand colors. And if you were creating a style guide for a business, you would establish specific colors and you would not deviate from that. In fact, these are the Full Sail brand colors, and this is straight out of the Full Sail style guide that our marketing department uses. Whenever they create new marketing content, they refer back to this style guide. It's like the design Bible, they would refer, as the term they would use, because this is absolute what it should be. Along with these color swatches, you would also have color codes, and that's something that's going to be in your mood board. The color codes are used to digitally reproduce a color very precisely. So you're not guessing at, this color, this variety of orange is close enough. No, you're reproducing it exactly by putting in those color codes. And there's 3 different ones. There's RGB, which is often used for web design. There's CMYK. By the way, RGB means red, green, blue. CMYK is cyan, yellow, magenta, black. And CMYK color is the codes that are used for printers. So if you're printing a document or a book, you would give them your CMYK color codes. Whereas if you were working with a web designer, you would give them your RGB or your hexadecimal color codes. And you'll see those on the mood board. And there's a video provided that shows how to find those in Pages. It's very simple. You don't have to be able to read them by sight. There are graphic designers that can look at a hex code and say, oh, I know, this is blue. I can't do it. But I can take that color code and put it in Photoshop and reproduce that color. And that's what ultimately is important. So when you establish these specific colors, like the burnt orange, and this looks like olive green. It's actually described in the style guide as a dark shade of yellow, but there it is. You don't deviate from these, and you use these repeatedly in order to build familiarity. So if you look at our documents, if you look at your course catalog, you'll see those colors on the pages. Even the little page number is in that burnt orange. The titles are in the burnt orange. On other pages that are the content pages, they're white, but all the titles are in orange, or that not green color. And any little call-outs are done in those colors as well. Our logo, the airplane, is orange, and so forth. So any brand, and the golden arches with McDonald's, they're consistently used. The same colors are consistently used because we recognize that. A lot of times you'll see these kind of summaries. It'll be the color psychology table that'll say blue represents dependability. Purple is imagination, and so forth. I don't really like these because they're too prescriptive. It feels like one of those dream interpretation books, and it really doesn't work that way with color. It isn't that cut and dry. Not everyone will look at say see gray and think that's a calm color. Sometimes it can be very bleak. It all depends on the context, and that's what's important. And I mentioned that before. It's the interaction between the context, whether it's the imagery or the business, and the color itself. One thing, and this is something it's probably not in the Linda lesson, but one thing I've noticed just from my own observations is that the primary colors, which is red, blue, and yellow, tend to be more conservative. So if you have a business or a brand that's more reserved or business-like, a lot of times they'll stick with those primary colors. So you see Dell, JP Morgan, HP, IBM. In the blue, you have Exxon and Ace Hardware and Canon, Avis Rental Cars in the red, and yellow with Sprint and UPS, National Geographic. The farther you get away from those primary colors, so into the secondary colors, like orange and green, and then into tertiary colors, the more offbeat the brands become. So getting into purple, which is generally seen as a very quirky and artsy color, then you have Barbie and you have Sci-Fi Channel, Welch's, which of course would correspond to grapes with grape jelly and so forth. There's a few that are more serious businesses, like, well, the Aussie, which is they make shampoos and stuff, and T-Mobile. But for the most part, the impressions, the businesses you see here are trying to create a more fun vibe as opposed to the very reserved General Electric in the blue. So it's something to consider when you're creating your own color palette for your own brand in your mood board. If you are trying to make a more upbeat feel, then start with a base color that is more quirky or more exciting. Whereas if you're going for something that's more business-like, start with one of those primary colors, red or blue. And once you pick that first color, that's sort of your base color that everything's, that's going to be your color for your brand, then you can decide where you want to go from there. Do you want it to be monochromatic and just use that color like Dell? Or do you want to have more colors? And if you want to have more colors, do you want them to be really contrasting and dynamic, or do you want them to be calm and reserved and elegant? And these are some of the brands and how they've used those. BP, we already saw, has the analogous colors, and they have that more natural and environmentally friendly image that they're trying to build. Firefox is going for a more dynamic feel with the fiery design of the foxtail as well as the contrasting colors. A lot of sports teams use complementary colors because they want to be more action oriented in their appearance. In Burger King, this is what's called triadic. They used the three primary colors together, and it's a little more middle of the ground between contrast and harmony. So again, once you know that basic rule of thumb, if you want to have more dynamic and exciting personality, then go with complementary colors. If you want it to be more elegant, reserved, and harmonious, go with analogous. Then you can plan these things pretty easily. All you need to do is decide where you want to start, what color you want to start with, and then look back at your color wheel. This was just another example of how these are used consistently in all of your branding. Burger King uses this color scheme in everything. This is an ad, a print ad, but if you look at the packaging, same colors, same motifs, same thing with their signs at their stores, and even the architecture of their stores. It's consistent so that you know it. When you see it, you know that's Burger King. Still applies in web design as well. This is a complementary colored web design. And if you look at the details of the website, they're obviously going for a very tongue-in-cheek, lighthearted approach with their slogan, great websites, no lame marketing slogans, the little kid with the mustache drawn on, and so forth, and the colors go right along with that. Okay, so did you have any questions, anything as far as your mood board goes and figuring out what colors you want to associate with your brand? Excellent, great. So that is my presentation for this week, and I appreciate you joining me and as we went through that. Color is a huge topic. There are entire courses dedicated to color theory alone. So we are touching the surface, but it is a very useful and powerful element to any media you create, as we saw with film and web design and graphic design and advertising. What I'd like for you to do, though, now is just as you go through your day and you're encountering media online, on TV, wherever, start taking it apart. Look at the colors they're using and the color relationships and ask, why are they doing that? Okay, so that is all I had prepared for tonight. And again, thank you for joining me. And if you are all set, then I'm happy to let you go and have a good evening.